In our last episode, we watched a quiet but profound shift. As Britain and France scolded and squeezed, Prussia arrived with engineers, contracts, and respect. For a moment it seemed the Ottomans might have found a new path, a European power that did not demand repayment or territory. But in 1869 and 1871 tragedy struck in Istanbul. Fuad Pasha and then Ali Pasha, the last great statesman of the Tanzimat, died. With them went the last guardrails of reform. The empire they left behind was not yet ruined, but without their skill and discipline, the Ottoman state began to drift into chaos. This is road to destruction, the world wars. As Ali Pasha's coffin was carried out of Istanbul in 1871, another figure edged closer to the center of power, Mahmud Nedim Pasha. To his admirers, he was pliable and charming. To his critics, he was vain, venal, and far too fond of Russian whispers. In the absence of giants like Fuad and Ali, men like Mahmud Nedim thrived. He would become in time the symbol of everything the Tanzimat had once tried to resist: corruption, censorship, and dependence on foreign powers. Abdulaziz, once nudged toward reform by his viziers, now stood alone, and alone he faltered. Instead of reasoned counsel, he was surrounded by flatterers, men like Mahmud Nedim Pasha, whose nickname Nedimov reflected his coziness with Russian envoys. Ministers became courtiers, courtiers became ministers, and policy became indulgence. Ships were ordered without plans, palaces drawn up without revenues, railways promised without budgets. The Sultan ruled not by reform, but by impulse. Abdulaziz, now in his mid-40s, withdrew deeper into his palaces. Once proud to host monarchs and oversee ministries, he now surrounded himself with favorites who told him only what he wished to hear. Where Ali Pasha had once argued, Abdulaziz's new advisers bowed. The Sultan, who had once been coaxed toward reform, now indulged his whims. The Tanzimat had once promised freedom of the press, but in these years, fear triumphed over promise. Istanbul's newspapers, Tercümani Ahval and Tasvir-i Efkar, had grown bolder, printing sharp critiques of waste and corruption. In 1872, Shinasi's successors were harassed into silence. Namık Kemal, the young poet and journalist, was forced into exile for criticizing the Sultan's extravagance. Abdulaziz's answer to dissent was censorship, presses shuttered, writers banished, and political speech strangled. What had been the empire's first experiment in public accountability collapsed into paranoia. Corruption filled the void. Without Ali Pasha's discipline, ministries became feeding grounds. Telegraph contracts went to friends of the palace. Railway concessions were sold off cheaply to foreign speculators. The Ministry of Public Works, once tasked with modernizing, became notorious for bribes and kickbacks. Provincial governors followed the example. In Bosnia, food aid during the famine of the 1860s was diverted to profiteers. In Crete, soldiers went unpaid while administrators lined their pockets. The Tanzimat's promise of just, efficient government had curdled into graft. Beyond the capital, the empire's hold on its provinces grew weaker still. In Arabia, the Sharif of Mecca quarreled with Istanbul over subsidies, while Bedouin raids disrupted pilgrim caravans. The prestige of protecting the Hajj, once a pillar of Ottoman legitimacy as caliph, grew harder to maintain. In the Balkans, Orthodox peasants whispered that Russia, not Istanbul, would bring relief. Secret committees spread pamphlets and prayers, fanned by agents from St. Petersburg, and all the while the world moved on. In 1869, the Suez Canal opened, a marvel of engineering that redrew the map of trade. French engineers cut through desert rock, and British ships cut weeks off the voyage to India. Yet for the Ottomans, whose empire straddled the Red Sea, the canal brought no real gain. It was owned and operated by Europeans, another reminder of how modernization happened around them, not through them. Meanwhile, Russia stepped closer. Its diplomats whispered of Orthodox Muslim solidarity, of peace between old enemies. Abdulaziz, tired of British arrogance and French lectures, listened. Even Russia, the empire's oldest foe, now seemed preferable to constant humiliation from the West. By 1873, the Ottoman Empire glittered on the surface, but beneath was hollow, censored, corrupt, and deeply in debt. The Tanzimat dream was dead, and the Sultan was more isolated than ever. The empire was drifting into crisis, its foundations rotting beneath marble palaces and ironclads, and soon those foundations would crumble. In our next episode, The Debt Spiral, the bills come due. Each palace, each ship, each loan builds into a crushing weight. By the 1870s, half of the empire's revenues are claimed by foreign creditors. The Ottoman budget itself falls under European supervision. No army marches, no shots are fired, yet through ledgers and loans, the empire begins to lose its freedom. This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars.